Jalen Milroe, the next quarterback taken off the board, that by Seattle at pick number 92 in the third round. He joins the new guy in town, Sam Darnold, in Seattle's quarterback room. The last time Seattle selected a quarterback in the third round, it worked out pretty well. That was Russell Wilson in 2012. Joined now on the program by Field Yates. Field, you and I visited after round one, and Shedeur Sanders had not been selected yet. I did not envision any scenario where I'd be visiting with you here on Friday night after rounds 2 and 3, with that still being the same situation and him being available come Saturday morning. That is where we are. What theories are there among the folks you talk to as to why that is the case?
Yeah, Scott, I am stunned. I thought last night when I mentioned the possibility of Shedeur Sanders maybe not being drafted in the second round, that even perhaps I would look silly a day later and he would hear his name called within the first 5 or 6 selections tonight. So let's talk about how the quarterbacks are evaluated during this pre-draft process. Because I'll tell you this, on the field, Shedeur Sanders is a day 1 or day 2 selection. He was the only quarterback in the entire FBS last season who, when he was not under pressure, completed at least 80% of his passes. This is a 4-year starter who took 2 separate programs to unprecedented heights, extremely experienced, throws with great touch and accuracy, helped elevate the profile of other wide receivers beyond just Travis Hunter. It only leads me to believe that teams maybe are less comfortable with some of the stuff that comes into the intangibles department for Shedeur Sanders. And frankly, I'm not sure that's justified. Scott, I understand that Deion Sanders, and there's a lot of attention being paid to him being the son of one of the most notable athletes that we have seen in the history of professional sports. But frankly, I'm stunned. I don't have a good explanation for why Shedeur Sanders has not heard his name called. I had him as the 16th rated player on my board. I haven't been doing this nearly as long as Mel Kiper, but I can't imagine there have been too many instances where the 16th rated player on a big board is still available on day 3 or going into day 3. I am truly perplexed by why this situation has gotten to the point that we are now in.
Yeah, and we saw Mel at the end of the coverage, and he's just said, I'm disgusted. He's just stunned. I think we all understand how Mel feels about Sanders, has him as his top player on the board. Now, in some other storylines in terms of what we have seen through the first 2 days here, the Chicago Bears have a second-year quarterback, Caleb Williams, taken number 1 last year. They have a new head coach in Ben Johnson, and I'm interested in how you assess what the Bears have done through 2 days and 3 rounds in this draft.
Yeah, I think Caleb Johnson has been smiling since about, late January when they hired Ben Johnson as their head coach, and no reason for Caleb to not be feeling optimistic right now. They end up reshaping the offensive line with 3 new starters, and then since the beginning of last night, the Bears have just continued to invest in pieces around Caleb Williams. Obviously, Colston Leavenworth, the 10th overall pick last night out of Michigan, but tonight they go right back to the offensive well. Luther Burden, their first pick, the wide receiver out of Missouri. Scott, I thought coming into the season, he might have been a top 15 player in the entire class. He had over 1,200 receiving yards a year ago. This is a powerful, explosive player with the football in his hands. Great opportunities for Luther Burden III, and good things are going to happen. I'm sure Ben Johnson has that exact archetype in his mind. And then Ozzie Trapillo, their later pick in the second round, a right tackle at Boston College who I think has the opportunity to play either side of the ball at the NFL level. And then finally, when you hire Dennis Allen as your defensive coordinator, you got to find guys that can rush up the field. And Shamar Turner, the defensive tackle out of Texas A&M, a former teammate of Shamar Stewart at Texas A&M. Good one-gap penetrator during his collegiate days. That should show up for Chicago, who has put some decent resources along the defensive tackle front this offseason, with Grady Jarrett being the veteran and now Turner being the rookie that he can be the understudy of Garrett of.
Field, there was a lack of clarity, a lack of consensus heading into round 1, right? There are teams that seem to maybe think there'd be 50 different players that could go in the first 32 picks, and that speaks to the fact that maybe there aren't as many true dudes as we typically see. How are we seeing it play out that there's a lack of clarity and consensus among teams through the first 3 rounds?
Yeah, I mentioned obviously Shedeur Sanders being 16 on my big board, and we're going into pick 103 tomorrow, and obviously he is still available. But Scott, I was getting texts midway through tonight of people saying, I can't believe a guy that we had, as a top 40 player is still available on the board. And conversely, hearing from teams saying, man, there's some players that we thought might be available in rounds 5 and 6 that have already gone off the board. I think the reality is that we always are tempted on our side, on the NFL draft analysts side to stack these players vertically. I drop a top 200 is available about a week before the draft begins. For NFL teams, each of these teams is using a different scale, right? For them, it's what about the scheme fit? What do we know about the intangibles of the player? What are our positional needs that we have across our roster that really showed up tonight with players that I did not necessarily expect to come off the board, and then players that I did not expect to be available as we go into day 3.
I want to close with one more. We had an NFC team with a first-year coach. We have an AFC team with a first year with the team coach, but he is a veteran in Pete Carroll. What do you make of what the Raiders have done through the first 3 rounds?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what the Raiders have done. I thought the Ashton Genty pick was one of those don't overthink it selections last night. Of course, Pete Carroll is as determined to run the football as probably any coach of the past 25 years. And then the Raiders started tonight by moving around on the board. I just talked about how there's so much or so little consensus. It also meant a lot of depth in this year's class. But Jack Bech was a player that throughout the pre-draft process I identified as one of my guys. I just believe fundamentally there are 2 jobs of a wide receiver. You got to get open, you got to catch the football. He does both of those at a very high level. And then back-to-back resources with picks 98 and 99 in the 3rd round with Caleb Rogers, a tackle who I think will play guard from Texas Tech at the NFL level. And then Charles Grant, this really unusual prospect out of William Mary, kind of a ball of clay. This is a guy coming from a small school who with some development can become an eventual left tackle at the NFL level. He's got great wingspan, needs to be a little bit more powerful at the point of attack. He's got these big hands and long arms, converting some of those traits into power. But I liked the way that they closed the night after kind of diversifying their portfolio with some trades early in the evening.
Feel to appreciate the perspective, particularly as it relates to the big question mark we have. We'll get an answer presumably Saturday as the draft continues, and we wait to see where Shedeur Sanders will land. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. Appreciate you. A surprise for Cam Ward. The guy that wore number 1 said, you can wear number 1 now as well. Here's Ward and Moon on adding to the legacy of number 1 for this franchise.
Before I called him, I made sure I watched his highlights to make sure he was legit, and so he was legit. You know.
I'm excited to see what he's going to do with his legacy wearing this number, and I'm proud of the things that I did to establish my legacy with the time I wore that number.
It means a lot, especially for what he did back in the Oilers. But I don't think no number 1's made plays for Tennessee. I plan on being the first one, not the last one to do it. But I'm honored.
We were laughing at our show meeting. This young man didn't see Warren Moon, but if you put on the tape, he's going to say, "Damn, that man can throw the football." Very cool storyline. Speaking of, a couple storylines from the first couple of rounds. 9 defensive tackles taken in the first 2 rounds. We knew that was coming. That's tied for the 2nd most in the common draft era, dating back to 1967. Only year with more 1970. There were 10 taken before the 3rd round. One of the reasons why Ohio State won it all, an obscene amount of talent. 7 players from the Buckeyes selected in the first 2 rounds, the most of any school this year. It's also tied with the Buckeyes in 2016 through 2 rounds in a single year. All that NIL money paid off in a big way, able to keep those guys around. SEC and Big Ten have 66 of the 102 picks taken thus far, nearly 2/3 of them. Georgia and Texas lead all SEC teams with 6 each. Ohio State led the Big Ten with 7. Quite a bit of success has come out of the 2nd and 3rd rounds of the draft through the years. In fact, 42 gold jackets. We're talking about Hall of Famers, obviously. Some notables include Brett Favre, Michael Strahan, Curtis Martin, and the great Joe Montana. With some thoughts on day 2, here's Mel Kiper Jr.
I really like what the New England Patriots did. You have a franchise quarterback in Drake May. What do? You try to help him out. Try to get him to that level as quickly as you can. You need the left tackle, the blind side protector, like Will Campbell. As long as that arm length holds up, he can be a heck of a player in the National Football League. He'll be a key guy, obviously, for Drake May. Then you get a running back, a game breaker, okay? You got Ramondre Stevenson. Now you go get a guy like Travion Henderson, who's a touchdown waiting to happen. Catch the ball effectively out of the backfield, and he will be an outstanding blocker as well. Guess what? He never fumbled his entire career. Then you go and get a Kyle Williams, a dynamic playmaker, wide receiver who was excellent at Washington State. Even when Cam Ward was there, Cam Ward left, and he still had more production. Then you go to Jared Wilson, center, took over for Cedric Van Granger this year, became a really good player, outstanding athlete. runs in a 4.8 at 305 pounds, but he needs more work, needs more experience, but the talent is in abundance. For Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders, all I can say is I think it's disgusting. I don't understand what the heck's going on with this. 5th player on my board. It's never happened before in 47 years where a player that high has dropped this far into the 4th round at quarterback. That's sitting there in round 4 with other quarterbacks being taken who aren't as good as Shedeur, aren't even close, in my opinion, in terms of accuracy, toughness. Arm strength is certainly more than good enough. I don't see, outside of not being have the rocket arm and the 4.6 speed and the big frame, the 6'3", 230-pound frame, what is he lacking? Somebody's going to have to explain that one to me. 4th round, Kirk Cousins went. 4th round, Dak Prescott went. Worked out pretty good for them. It's just that Shedeur was projected a lot higher than they were. That's why we're having this discussion.
That's kind of what I said a little bit earlier in the show. No surprise, Shedeur Sanders is the best